The laughter stopped the moment they walked through his door. For 3 years, Samuel Morrison had endured the daily chorus of mockery that followed him through the streets of Cedar Falls, Wyoming territory. At 3 feet, 8 inches tall, he'd grown accustomed to being the punchline of every cruel joke, the target of every pointed finger, the reason children giggled and adults whispered behind cupped hands. But when those 4 Lakota women entered Morrison's general store on that frost-covered morning in November 1882, something shifted in the very air of the small frontier town that would change everything Samuel thought he knew about respect, power, and the true meaning of strength. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel Morrison's days began before dawn, not by choice, but by necessity. Rising at 4 in the morning allowed him to complete his most vulnerable tasks, restocking high shelves, organizing inventory, preparing the store for business before the first customers arrived. By 6 a.m. sharp, he would position himself behind the counter on the custom-built platform his late father had constructed, designed to bring him to eye level with average-height patrons. From this elevated perch, Samuel could maintain some semblance of dignity while conducting business. Though it never lasted long, the platform had become both his salvation and his prison. Built from sturdy oak planks reinforced with iron brackets, it measured 4 feet wide by 6 feet long, with carefully calculated risers that brought Samuel's diminutive frame to a more commanding position. His father, Benjamin Morrison, had spent 3 weeks perfecting the construction during the summer of Samuel's 16th birthday, understanding with painful clarity that his son would need every possible advantage to survive in a world that measured worth by physical stature. Cedar Falls, Wyoming territory, population 847, existed primarily to serve the cattle ranches scattered across the surrounding grasslands and the occasional mining operations that dotted the nearby hills. The town consisted of one main street lined with essential businesses: Morrison's General Store, the Frontier Bank, Murphy's Saloon, the blacksmith shop, the doctor's office, the post office, and the cattleman's hotel. Behind the main thoroughfare, modest homes housed families who'd come west seeking opportunities that the established east could no longer provide. Samuel's store occupied the most prominent corner location, inherited from his father who'd established the business during the town's founding 15 years earlier. Benjamin Morrison had been a man of average height but extraordinary vision, recognizing that successful frontier commerce required not just goods, but trust, reliability, and genuine service to the community. He'd built Morrison's General Store to be the heart of Cedar Falls, a place where ranchers could find everything from horseshoes to hairpins, where families could purchase both necessities and small luxuries that made frontier life bearable. Irony wasn't lost on Samuel, that he'd inherited a business designed to serve a community that struggled to see him as anything more than a curiosity. His father's sudden death from pneumonia 3 years earlier had thrust Samuel into full ownership at age 22, transforming him overnight from protected son to vulnerable businessman in a town where respect was earned through physical presence and social standing. The morning routine that Samuel had perfected began with unlocking the heavy wooden door, its brass hinges announcing his arrival with a distinctive creak that served as the town's unofficial opening bell. He would then light the oil lamps positioned throughout the store, their warm glow illuminating shelves packed with merchandise that represented the lifeline of frontier survival: flour, coffee, ammunition, tools, fabric, medicine, candy for children, tobacco for men, cosmetics for women, and hundreds of other items that connected Cedar Falls to the manufactured world beyond the wilderness. Samuel took pride in his inventory management, maintaining stock levels that ensured customers could find what they needed without having to wait for special orders or travel to larger towns. His system of organization rivaled that of stores in much larger cities, with clearly labeled sections, rotating displays that highlighted seasonal necessities, and a detailed ledger system that tracked everything from popular items to customer preferences. But organizational excellence couldn't shield him from the daily humiliations that began the moment his first customers arrived. Well, if it isn't our little shopkeeper, would come the inevitable greeting from someone like Jake Patterson, a ranch foreman whose idea of humor involved towering over Samuel while making exaggerated requests. "Say, Sam, I need something from that top shelf there. Oh wait, I forgot you'd need a ladder to reach what I can grab with my bare hands." The laughter that followed such comments created a soundtrack of shame that accompanied nearly every transaction. Samuel had learned to maintain neutral expressions during these encounters, understanding that any visible reaction would only encourage further mockery. He would simply retrieve the requested items, calculate the charges, accept payment, and prepare for the next customer's creative interpretation of dwarf-related humor. Martha Hendricks, the banker's wife and self-appointed social arbiter of Cedar Falls, had perfected a particularly cruel routine. She would enter the store with deliberate fanfare, her dress bustling dramatically as she surveyed the merchandise from her full height of 5 feet 6 inches. "My goodness, Samuel," she would declare loudly enough for other customers to hear. "It must be so difficult running a business when you can barely see over your own counter. Perhaps you should consider a career more suited to your limitations." The word limitations always received special emphasis, spoken with the kind of false sympathy that cut deeper than outright insults. Martha would then proceed to request items from the highest shelves, watching with evident satisfaction as Samuel struggled with ladders and step stools to retrieve merchandise that she could have easily reached herself. Children presented their own category of daily torment. Led by Tommy Patterson, Jake's 8-year-old son, a group of local boys had developed an elaborate game they called Giant and the Dwarf. They would enter the store during busy periods, pretending to shop while actually positioning themselves to tower over Samuel, making exaggerated gasping sounds about his height, and asking loudly whether he was a real person or some kind of store decoration. The adults accompanying these children rarely intervened. More often, they would smile indulgently at their offspring's innocent curiosity, as if deliberate cruelty could be excused by youth. Samuel learned to brace himself whenever he heard children's voices approaching his store, knowing that the next few minutes would test his patience and self-respect in ways that grown men rarely managed. Dr. William Foster, one of the few educated men in Cedar Falls, had developed his own sophisticated form of mockery. Rather than crude jokes about height, the doctor would engage Samuel in conversations, clearly designed to highlight intellectual limitations that Foster assumed must accompany physical differences. "Tell me, Samuel," Foster would say while examining patent medicines, "do you truly understand the chemical compounds in these preparations? Or do you simply sell what the distributors recommend?" Such questions implied that Samuel's stature somehow correlated with mental capacity, an assumption that revealed more about Foster's prejudices than Samuel's abilities. The doctor would continue these interrogations while other customers listened, creating public examinations that positioned Samuel as a curiosity requiring professional assessment rather than a businessman deserving respect. The economic dimension of Samuel's situation added another layer of complexity to his daily humiliations. Morrison's General Store remained the most comprehensive supplier in the region, meaning that even customers who mocked Samuel still depended on his business for their survival needs. This created a twisted dynamic where people felt entitled to entertainment at Samuel's expense while simultaneously requiring his services. Ranch hands would congregate in the store during slow periods, treating it as an informal gathering place where Samuel's presence provided convenient amusement. They would place bets on whether he could reach certain items without assistance, create elaborate scenarios requiring him to move around the store while they offered running commentary on his movements, and generally behave as if he were performing for their entertainment rather than trying to conduct business. Samuel's isolation extended beyond business hours into every aspect of social life in Cedar Falls. Church attendance meant enduring whispered comments about God's mysterious purposes in creating such diversity in human form. Town meetings resulted in suggestions that perhaps someone of normal proportions should represent the business community in important discussions. Social gatherings inevitably featured well-meaning but deeply insulting conversations about how remarkable it was that someone like Samuel could function so independently. The psychological toll of constant mockery had shaped Samuel's personality in ways he was only beginning to understand. He'd developed hypervigilance about social situations, constantly scanning for signs of impending humiliation. His speech patterns had become carefully modulated to avoid giving anyone additional ammunition for ridicule. His movements within the store followed precise routines designed to minimize vulnerability while maximizing efficiency. Sleep often eluded Samuel as his mind replayed the day's encounters, analyzing each interaction for hidden meanings, implied insults, and missed opportunities to assert dignity. He would lie in his bed behind the store, staring at the ceiling while voices echoed in his memory. Little Sam, the dwarf shopkeeper, God's joke on Cedar Falls, half a man trying to do a whole man's job. Yet despite 3 years of relentless social assault, Samuel had maintained both his business and his sanity through a combination of stubborn pride and genuine love for commerce. He understood inventory management, customer service, and business operations better than any other merchant within 100 miles. His store consistently showed profits, his customers' needs were efficiently met, and his reputation for fairness in pricing and quality remained unblemished. The contradiction between his professional competence and social rejection created a daily tension that Samuel navigated with increasing skill. He learned to separate his identity as a businessman from his identity as a social outcast, finding purpose in work even when finding acceptance in community proved impossible. But on that November morning when the 4 Lakota women entered his store, Samuel had no way of knowing that his carefully constructed survival strategies were about to be tested in ways he never could have imagined. The laughter that had defined his existence for 3 years was about to stop, replaced by something far more dangerous and infinitely more transformative than anything Cedar Falls had ever witnessed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning of November 15th, 1882, began like every other morning in Samuel Morrison's carefully ordered world, but the air itself seemed different. A strange tension hung over Cedar Falls, the kind of atmospheric pressure that preceded prairie storms, though no clouds darkened the crystalline Wyoming sky. Samuel noticed it first in the behavior of the horses tied outside Murphy's saloon, normally placid animals, stamping nervously and pulling at their reins as if sensing some approaching disruption their human counterparts couldn't yet perceive. By 8 o'clock, Samuel had completed his morning preparations and settled into his familiar position behind the counter, reviewing inventory sheets while waiting for the day's first customers. The routine felt particularly important that morning, a necessary anchor against the inexplicable restlessness that seemed to permeate the very walls of his store. He'd learned to trust his instincts about unusual days, developed through years of reading the subtle social currents that determined whether he'd face merely casual mockery or more concentrated cruelty. The first sign that this day would deviate from familiar patterns came when Tommy Patterson burst through the store's front door without his usual entourage of tormentors. The 8-year-old moved with urgent purpose rather than his typical swagger, his face flushed with excitement that had nothing to do with plans for humiliating the dwarf shopkeeper. "Mr. Morrison," Tommy called out, forgetting for once to comment on Samuel's height or demand entertainment. "There's Indians coming. Real Indians on horses, heading straight for town. Pass says they look like they mean business." Samuel felt his pulse quicken, though not from fear. The relationship between Cedar Falls and the various Native American tribes in the region had remained relatively peaceful, marked by occasional trading interactions and mutual respect for territorial boundaries. But times were changing rapidly. Across the Wyoming Territory, with increasing tensions over land rights, broken treaties, and the constant pressure of westward expansion, the arrival of any significant Native American delegation required careful attention to both opportunity and danger. "How many, Tommy?" Samuel asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "And coming from which direction?" "4 of them, riding from the northeast," Tommy replied, his excitement making him forget to include his usual mocking commentary. "But Pa says they're women, which is real strange. He's never seen Indian women riding alone like that, especially not women who look like they're in charge of something important." The boy's observation struck Samuel as significant. In his limited experience with Native American visitors, women typically traveled as part of larger family groups, with men taking visible leadership roles during any interactions with white settlements. A delegation consisting entirely of women suggested something unprecedented, either in terms of the purpose of their visit or the status of the women themselves. Samuel's contemplation was interrupted by the sound of multiple footsteps on the wooden sidewalk outside his store, accompanied by the distinctive murmur of voices that indicated a gathering crowd. Through his front window, he could see residents of Cedar Falls emerging from various businesses and homes, their attention focused on something approaching from the edge of town. Jake Patterson appeared in the doorway, his usual smirk replaced by an expression of genuine uncertainty. For the first time in 3 years, the ranch foreman seemed to have forgotten about Samuel's height, his attention completely absorbed by whatever was approaching Cedar Falls. "Morrison," Jake said, using Samuel's surname rather than the diminutive Little Sam he typically employed. "You might want to see this. There's 4 Indian women riding toward town, and they don't look like they're here for casual trading. They're dressed for something formal, maybe even ceremonial." Samuel stepped down from his platform and moved toward the window, noting with surprise that Jake made no comment about his need to stand on a chair to get a clear view of the street. The entire social dynamic of the moment had shifted, unified by curiosity about the approaching visitors. Through the glass, Samuel could see them clearly now, still perhaps a quarter-mile from the main street, but close enough to assess both their appearance and their bearing. 4 women on horseback, riding in perfect formation with a dignity and presence that commanded attention even from a distance. Their clothing combined traditional Native American elements with practical frontier adaptations, suggesting both cultural pride and tactical awareness. The woman leading the group rode a magnificent black stallion with the easy confidence of someone born to horsemanship. Even from this distance, Samuel could see that she carried herself with unmistakable authority, her posture erect, her movements economical and purposeful. The 3 women flanking her maintained perfect formation, their own mounts moving in synchronized harmony that spoke to years of shared experience and mutual trust. "Look at how they're riding," whispered Martha Hendricks, who'd appeared beside the window with her typical flair for inserting herself into any situation that promised social drama. "Like they own the territory itself. I've never seen such boldness from Indian women." Samuel found Martha's comment telling in ways she probably didn't intend. The banker's wife had built her social identity around controlling and diminishing others, yet these approaching women radiated a power that clearly unsettled her usual confidence. For the first time since he'd known her, Martha Hendricks seemed uncertain about her ability to establish dominance in a social situation. Dr. Foster joined the growing crowd of observers, his medical bag in hand as if anticipating either diplomatic negotiations or potential conflict. "Fascinating," he murmured, pulling out a small pair of field glasses to study the approaching delegation. The lead rider appears to be wearing regalia that suggests significant status within her tribe. Those aren't casual traveling clothes. They're formal presentation garments. Samuel watched with growing fascination as the women drew closer. The leader wore a decorated leather dress that spoke to both artistic sophistication and cultural significance, with intricate beadwork that caught the morning sunlight in complex patterns. Her hair was arranged in elaborate braids adorned with feathers and silver ornaments that indicated rank or achievement within her community, but it was her face that captured Samuel's attention most completely. Even at a distance, her expression conveyed intelligence, determination, and a kind of quiet power that had nothing to do with physical intimidation and everything to do with personal authority earned through experience and respect. This was not a woman who had ever been mocked, diminished, or treated as less than fully human. The three women accompanying her displayed similar bearing, though Samuel began to notice subtle differences in their regalia and positioning that suggested distinct roles within their group. One wore decorations that indicated warrior status. Another displayed symbols associated with spiritual or healing practices, and the third carried herself with the diplomatic bearing of someone skilled in negotiations and cultural translation. As they reached the outskirts of town, their horses slowed to a measured walk that allowed the women to observe the gathering crowd while maintaining perfect control over their approach. Samuel realized he was witnessing a masterful display of psychological strategy, designed to establish presence and command respect before any verbal communication began. The crowd of Cedar Falls residents had grown to include nearly everyone who wasn't actively engaged in essential morning tasks. Samuel counted at least 30 people gathered along the main street, their usual morning routines forgotten in favor of witnessing what was clearly an unprecedented event in the town's history. What struck Samuel most powerfully was the complete silence that had fallen over the normally chattering community. These were people who never missed an opportunity for commentary, gossip, or social analysis, yet the approaching women had somehow commanded a respectful quiet that Samuel had never seen his fellow residents display toward anyone. The lead rider guided her stallion directly toward Morrison's general store, her choice of destination sending ripples of speculation through the crowd. Samuel felt his heart rate increase as he realized that these women weren't here for random trading or casual interaction. They had a specific purpose, and somehow his store featured prominently in their plans. Dr. Foster leaned toward Jake Patterson, his voice low but audible to those nearby. "They're heading straight for Morrison's place. That suggests they've been here before, or someone has told them specifically where to find what they're looking for." Samuel's mind raced through possibilities. He'd never had direct dealings with any Native American customers, though he'd occasionally heard stories about tribal members trading at other frontier businesses. His store carried many items that would be valuable to various communities: metal goods, fabric, tools, preserved foods, but nothing that would specifically attract a formal delegation. The women reached the front of his store and dismounted with fluid grace that spoke to lifelong equestrian expertise. Up close, Samuel could see that they ranged in age from perhaps 25 to 45, representing different generations within what was clearly a family or clan structure. The leader, who appeared to be in her early 30s, moved with the confident authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected many people. As they secured their horses to the hitching post with practiced efficiency, Samuel noticed details that revealed the careful planning behind their visit. Their saddlebags were packed for extended travel, their weapons were visible but positioned non-threateningly, and their overall presentation balanced cultural pride with diplomatic awareness. The crowd of Cedar Falls residents maintained their respectful distance, but Samuel could feel the weight of their collective attention focused on his store. For the first time in 3 years, he found himself at the center of community focus for reasons that had nothing to do with his height or physical differences. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. The lead woman paused at the base of the steps leading to his store's entrance, her dark eyes scanning the building's exterior with the assessment of someone evaluating both commercial potential and social dynamics. When her gaze passed across the front window where Samuel stood watching, their eyes met for a brief moment that seemed to contain recognition not of him personally, but of something he represented or symbolized. She turned to her companions and spoke quietly in what Samuel assumed was Lakota, her words inaudible, but her tone suggesting final instructions or confirmations of previously discussed plans. The other three women nodded their understanding, their body language indicating readiness for whatever interaction was about to unfold. Then, with the same measured dignity that had marked their entire approach, the four women walked up the steps toward Samuel's store. The leader reached for the door handle, paused for one final moment to survey the gathered crowd of white residents, and then pushed open the door that would change everything Samuel Morrison thought he knew about respect, power, and the possibility of finding allies in the most unexpected places. The brass hinges announced their entrance with the same familiar creak that marked every customer's arrival. But Samuel knew immediately that nothing about this encounter would follow familiar patterns. As the four Lakota women stepped into his store, the morning light framing their silhouettes, Samuel Morrison prepared for a conversation that would transform not just his understanding of commerce, but his fundamental beliefs about human dignity and the true sources of strength in an unforgiving world. The moment the four Lakota women crossed the threshold of Morrison's general store, Samuel experienced something he hadn't felt in 3 years: the complete absence of mockery, no snickering, no pointed stares at his height, no whispered comments about his appearance. Instead, the lead woman approached his counter with the same respectful bearing she might show to any merchant, her dark eyes meeting his directly without the downward glance that had become painfully familiar from other customers. "Good morning," she said in English that carried only the slightest accent, her voice pitched to convey both courtesy and authority. "I am Running Wolf Woman of the Oglala Lakota. These are my sisters. Stands sacred, kills many horses, and talks to spirits." She gestured to each woman in turn, their names carrying the weight of accomplished deeds rather than mere identification. Samuel found himself momentarily speechless, not from fear or uncertainty, but from the unprecedented experience of being addressed as an equal by someone whose presence commanded genuine respect. He stepped onto his platform to meet her eyes at a more equal level, noting that she observed this action without comment, judgment, or the smirk that typically accompanied such moments. "Samuel Morrison," he replied, finding his voice steadier than expected. "Welcome to Morrison's General Store. How may I assist you today?" Running Wolf Woman studied his store with the careful attention of someone who understood commercial operations, her gaze moving systematically from section to section as she assessed both inventory and organization. Samuel realized she was conducting a professional evaluation rather than casual browsing, suggesting that their visit had specific commercial objectives beyond mere curiosity. "We have traveled 5 days to reach your establishment," Running Wolf Woman said, turning her attention back to Samuel. "Word has reached our people about a merchant in Cedar Falls who maintains fair prices, honest weights, and quality goods. These are rare qualities in frontier trading, worth the journey to investigate personally." The implications of her statement struck Samuel with surprising force. Somewhere in the network of communication that connected various communities across the Wyoming Territory, his business practices had earned a reputation that extended far beyond the boundaries of his immediate area. While the residents of Cedar Falls saw only his physical differences, other communities had apparently focused on his commercial integrity. Stands sacred, a woman in her late 20s whose bearing suggested warrior training, moved toward the section where Samuel displayed tools and hardware. She examined items with the knowledgeable touch of someone familiar with practical applications, testing the balance of axes, checking the temper of knife blades, evaluating the construction quality of various implements. "Your iron goods show proper forging," she observed, speaking to Samuel while continuing her examination. "Many frontier merchants sell inferior products to our people, assuming we cannot distinguish quality from waste. This does not appear to be your practice." Kill's many horses, whose regalia indicated status as a hunter and provider, had gravitated toward the section containing preserved foods and cooking supplies. She opened containers with Samuel's permission, testing the freshness of flour, examining the quality of dried beans, assessing the grade of coffee that represented luxury items in most frontier communities. "These stores have been properly maintained," she announced with approval. "No weevils in the grain, no mold in the preserved meats. You understand the importance of food storage in harsh climates." Talks to Spirits, the oldest of the four women, and clearly their spiritual advisor, had been drawn to Samuel's collection of medicinal supplies and herbal remedies. She studied bottles and packets with the expertise of someone trained in healing arts, occasionally opening containers to examine contents that most customers accepted without question. "You carry genuine willow bark extract," she noted with surprise. "Not the diluted preparations that pass for medicine in many white settlements. And these herbs ... She held up a packet of dried plants. "These have been properly harvested and prepared. Where do you source such quality materials?" Samuel found himself engaged in the kind of detailed professional conversation he'd dreamed of having, but never experienced, with customers from Cedar Falls. These women understood commercial operations, appreciated quality merchandise, and approached trading with the sophisticated knowledge that came from experience with multiple suppliers across extensive territories. "I maintain relationships with suppliers in Denver, Cheyenne, and occasionally as far as St. Louis," Samuel explained, warming to the subject of inventory management. "Quality requires effort, but it also ensures customer satisfaction and repeat business. I'd rather sell fewer items at fair prices than volume goods that fail when people need them most." Running Wolf woman nodded with evident approval. "This approach explains your reputation among the tribes. We hear stories of merchants who cheat our people with inferior goods at inflated prices, but also stories of those who trade fairly regardless of the customer's race or appearance. Your name appears frequently in the second category." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the store's front door opening again, accompanied by the familiar voices of Cedar Falls residents who'd apparently overcome their initial respectful hesitation. Jake Patterson entered first, followed by Martha Hendricks and Dr. Foster, their expressions mixing curiosity with barely concealed territorial anxiety. "Morning, ladies," Jake said with the forced cheerfulness he typically employed when uncertain about social dynamics. "Hope our little shopkeeper here is taking good care of you. Though I should mention, if you're looking for serious business dealings, you might want to consider talking to actual businessmen rather than..." He gestured vaguely at Samuel, apparently unable to complete the insult in the presence of the Lakota women. The transformation in the store's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Running Wolf woman turned toward Jake with the kind of focused attention that predators typically reserved for threats, her entire bearing shifting from commercial courtesy to something far more dangerous. The other three women moved with subtle precision to positions that would allow them to control the space if necessary, their earlier relaxed demeanor replaced by alert readiness. "You speak disrespectfully of this merchant," Running Wolf woman sighed, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Mr. Morrison has demonstrated knowledge, fairness, and integrity in his business practices. These qualities command respect among people who understand their value." Martha Hendricks, apparently missing the warning signals that should have encouraged caution, stepped forward with her typical assumption of social dominance. "Well, I'm sure you ladies don't understand the complexities of our local situation. Samuel is a fine enough person, of course, but there are certain practical limitations that make serious business relationships rather challenging." Kills Many Horses spoke for the first time since the interruption, her English carrying the precision of someone who chose words carefully for maximum impact. "In our culture, we measure men by their actions, their word, and their contribution to the community's welfare. Physical appearance matters only to shallow people who lack the wisdom to recognize true worth." The rebuke was delivered with such calm certainty that even Martha seemed to recognize she'd encountered an entirely different category of social authority than anything she'd previously experienced. Dr. Foster, apparently attempting diplomatic intervention, stepped forward with his characteristic professional bearing. Certainly," he said with the patronizing tone he typically employed with patients. "We all appreciate cultural differences in perspective. But surely you understand that in commercial relationships, practical considerations must sometimes take precedence over purely theoretical ideals." Talks to Spirits fixed the doctor with a stare that seemed to penetrate beyond his professional facade to something far more fundamental about his character. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of spiritual authority that transcended cultural boundaries. "We see clearly, Doctor. We see a man whose healing knowledge is genuine but whose heart carries sickness that no medicine can cure. We see others whose bodies are large but whose spirits are small. And we see this merchant whose physical form differs from yours, but whose character towers above all of you." The silence that followed her statement stretched uncomfortably as the Cedar Falls residents struggled to process being evaluated and found wanting by people they'd automatically assumed to be inferior. Samuel watched the interaction with fascination, recognizing that he was witnessing a complete reversal of the power dynamics that had defined his existence for 3 years. Running Wolf woman turned back to Samuel, effectively dismissing the other white residents as if they'd ceased to exist. "We would like to discuss a significant trading arrangement," she said. "Our band requires supplies for the winter months, and we prefer to establish relationships with merchants who understand that respect flows both directions in honorable business dealings." Samuel felt his heart racing as he realized that these women were offering him exactly what he'd dreamed of finding: customers who valued quality, integrity, and professional competence over physical appearance or social conformity. But he also understood that accepting their proposal would fundamentally alter his relationship with the white community that had tormented him for years. "I would be honored to discuss such an arrangement," Samuel replied, his voice carrying more confidence than he'd felt since his father's death. "Perhaps we could review your specific requirements and explore how Morrison's General Store might serve your community's needs." As the 4 Lakota women gathered around his counter to begin serious commercial negotiations, Samuel caught glimpses of the stunned expressions on his usual tormentors' faces. For the first time in 3 years, Samuel Morrison was conducting business as an equal partner rather than a tolerated oddity, and the transformation was visible to everyone present. The language of respect he was learning required no translation. Uncomfortable departure of Jake Patterson, Martha Hendricks, and Dr. Foster left Morrison's General Store filled with a tension that had nothing to do with hostility and everything to do with possibility. Samuel found himself alone with 4 women whose presence had just fundamentally altered the social dynamics of his existence, and he was struggling to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. For 3 years, no one had defended him. Now, strangers from a completely different culture had not only recognized his worth, but actively challenged those who diminished it. Running Wolf woman spread a detailed map across Samuel's counter, her movements precise and businesslike as she transitioned from social confrontation to commercial negotiation. The map had been drawn on treated hide with remarkable accuracy, showing geographical features, water sources, seasonal hunting grounds, and the locations of various Lakota bands across a territory that stretched far beyond Samuel's previous understanding of the regional tribal presence. "Our winter camp lies here," she said, pointing to a location approximately 60 miles northeast of Cedar Falls, nestled in a valley that provided natural protection from prairie winds while offering access to both water and timber. "We are part of a confederation that includes 5 related bands, totaling nearly 400 people. Each band maintains its own leadership and hunting territories, but we coordinate activities for mutual benefit, especially during harsh seasons." Samuel studied the map with growing amazement, recognizing that he was being offered insight into a sophisticated network of communities that most white settlers never realized existed. The scale of organization suggested not just survival strategies, but complex social and economic systems that had been perfected over generations of prairie living. Stan's Sacred traced routes on the map that connected the various camps, her finger following paths that avoided white settlements while linking tribal communities in an intricate web of communication and trade. These trails allow movement of goods, information, and people across distances that would challenge most frontier travelers. "We maintain supply caches, emergency shelters, and detailed knowledge of seasonal conditions that make winter travel possible when necessary." Kill's many horses opened one of her saddlebags and withdrew examples of goods that the Confederation typically sought from white traders: metal cookware, woolen blankets, ammunition for hunting rifles, medical supplies, coffee, sugar, and various tools that complemented traditional implements. But she also revealed items that surprised Samuel with their sophistication: reading glasses for elderly members who'd learned to read English, writing materials for maintaining records, and even books on subjects ranging from animal husbandry to agricultural techniques. "We are not the primitive people that many whites imagine," Talks to Spirits observed with dry humor. "We adapt useful innovations while maintaining cultural traditions that have sustained us for centuries. This requires careful selection of trade partners who understand that intelligence takes many forms, and that different approaches to living can be equally valid." Samuel found himself nodding with understanding that went beyond commercial interest. The parallels between his own situation and theirs were becoming increasingly apparent. Both had been underestimated, dismissed, and misunderstood by people who lacked the wisdom to look beyond surface appearances, to recognize genuine capability and worth. Running, Wolf woman pulled out a leather pouch containing what appeared to be a substantial amount of silver coins, gold pieces, and even some paper. Currency that suggested the Confederation's trading network extended far beyond simple barter systems. "We are prepared to pay fair prices in the currency of your choice," she said. "Our hunting and trapping operations generate significant income when we deal with honest buyers, and we prefer to invest that income with merchants who treat us as valued customers rather than convenient targets for exploitation." The financial implications of what she was proposing began to dawn on Samuel with breathtaking clarity. A regular trading relationship with the Confederation of 400 people would represent more business than he currently conducted with the entire white population of Cedar Falls. Moreover, customers who valued quality over convenience and who understood the true cost of reliable goods would likely accept higher profit margins than the price-conscious ranchers and townspeople who comprised his current clientele. But running, Wolf woman wasn't finished outlining her proposal. She spread additional materials across the counter, detailed lists of seasonal requirements, inventory schedules that accounted for weather patterns and hunting cycles, and most remarkably, a proposed credit system that would allow the Confederation to purchase supplies during lean periods while guaranteeing payment during prosperous seasons. "We understand frontier commerce better than most traders realize," she explained. "Cash flow problems destroy more businesses than poor inventory management or bad locations. We are offering you a partnership that provides steady income throughout The year, large volume purchases that justify better wholesale pricing, and customers who will recommend your services to other tribal communities across the territory. Stand Sacred added another dimension to the proposal that Samuel hadn't anticipated. We also possess skills and knowledge that could benefit your operations. Hunting techniques that could supply your store with fresh meat during winter months. Plant identification and preparation methods that could expand your medicinal inventory. Weather prediction abilities that could help you anticipate supply shortages before they become critical. Samuel realized that these women were offering him something far more valuable than a simple customer relationship. They were proposing a genuine partnership that would leverage the strengths of both cultures while addressing the weaknesses that had limited his business growth. His store's location and access to wholesale suppliers would be combined with their territorial knowledge and resource management expertise. Kills many horses. Opened another saddlebag and withdrew samples of goods that the Confederation could provide in trade. High-quality furs and hides that commanded premium prices in Eastern markets. Medicinal plants that weren't available through traditional suppliers. Beadwork and crafted items that appealed to customers seeking unique decorative pieces, and most surprisingly, detailed maps and geographical information that could be valuable to other frontier businesses. Many white merchants assume that trade with tribal communities flows only one direction, she noted with evident amusement. They think we simply purchase manufactured goods without offering anything of equivalent value in return. This ignorance costs them opportunities for relationships that could benefit everyone involved. The sophistication of their proposal was becoming almost overwhelming. Samuel had expected a straightforward wholesale transaction, but these women were outlining an integrated commercial relationship that could transform his entire business model. They understood supply chain management, seasonal planning, credit systems, and market dynamics better than most formally educated businessmen he'd encountered. Talks to Spirits contributed her own perspective on the partnership's potential. Healing knowledge represents another area of mutual benefit. Your access to manufactured medicines combined with our understanding of natural remedies could serve both communities more effectively than either approach alone. Many frontier ailments respond better to traditional treatments than to products shipped from distant factories. Samuel's mind raced as he calculated the implications of everything they were proposing. The financial benefits were obvious and substantial, but the social ramifications were equally significant. Establishing a successful trading partnership with tribal communities would demonstrate to Cedar Falls residents that his business acumen extended far beyond their limited appreciation. More importantly, it would provide him with customers who valued his professional abilities rather than focusing on his physical appearance. But running Wolf Woman introduced another element that transformed the proposal from commercial opportunity to something approaching personal salvation. We have observed how the people of this town treat you, Mr. Morrison. Such behavior reveals their character more clearly than any words could express. We offer you not just trade partnership, but alliance with people who recognize worth where others see only difference. The word alliance carried implications that extended far beyond commercial relationships into realms of mutual protection, shared resources, and cultural exchange. Samuel understood that accepting their proposal would not just change his business, it would fundamentally alter his position within the broader community dynamics of the Wyoming Territory. Stand Sacred leaned forward with an intensity that suggested she was about to share information of particular importance. There are challenges ahead that will test everyone in this region. Changes in federal policies toward tribal lands, increasing pressure from cattle ranchers seeking expanded grazing rights, conflicts over water access that affect both white settlements and tribal communities. Businesses that build relationships across cultural boundaries will survive and prosper. Those that remain isolated within narrow communities will face increasing difficulties. Samuel realized that these women possessed political and economic intelligence that most frontier residents lacked. Their network of communication and analysis apparently extended far beyond local concerns to encompass territorial and even national developments that would affect everyone's future prospects. Aligning himself with such informed partners could provide advantages that went far beyond immediate commercial benefits. As the morning progressed and their discussion deepened, Samuel began to understand that he was being offered the opportunity to become something he'd never imagined possible, a bridge between communities that had traditionally viewed each other with suspicion and misunderstanding. His unique position as someone rejected by white society but respected by tribal visitors could evolve into a valuable role as cultural translator and commercial facilitator. The transformation of his store from a place of daily humiliation into a center of innovative cross-cultural commerce was beginning to seem not just possible, but inevitable. Samuel Morrison stared at the detailed proposal spread across his counter, his mind wrestling with the magnitude of the decision before him. The numbers alone were staggering, a potential tripling of his annual revenue through a single partnership. But the implications extended far beyond financial considerations into territories of social revolution that could fundamentally alter his existence in Cedar Falls and beyond. "I need to understand the risks," Samuel said finally, his business training overriding the emotional appeal of finally finding customers who respected him. "A partnership of this scope would require significant changes to my operations, inventory investments, and storage capacity. If something goes wrong, political tensions, supply disruptions, changes in tribal leadership, I could face financial ruin." Running Wolf woman nodded with approval at his caution. Wise merchants consider both opportunities and dangers before making commitments. Your concern demonstrates the careful thinking that has built your reputation for reliability. She paused, studying his face with an intensity that suggested she was evaluating more than just commercial considerations. "But understand that maintaining your current situation also carries risks that may be less obvious but equally dangerous." Before Samuel could ask what she meant, the store's front door burst open with violent force, causing the brass hinges to squeal in protest. 5 men entered with the aggressive bearing of people who'd come to assert territorial dominance rather than conduct business. Samuel recognized them immediately, ranch hands from the largest cattle operation in the territory, led by Trace McKinnon, whose reputation for violence was exceeded only by his contempt for anyone he considered inferior. McKinnon stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and carried himself with the arrogant confidence of someone who'd never faced serious opposition to his will. His pale blue eyes surveyed the scene inside the store with obvious displeasure, taking in the Lakota women, their detailed maps and trading materials, and Samuel's obvious engagement in serious negotiations. Well, McKinnon drawled, his voice carrying the lazy menace of a predator who enjoyed playing with cornered prey. "Looks like our little shopkeeper has been entertaining some very interesting visitors. Hope they understand that this town has certain expectations about appropriate business relationships." The 4 Lakota women had immediately shifted into alert readiness, their relaxed negotiation postures replaced by the controlled tension of warriors assessing potential threats. Samuel noticed that their positioning had subtly changed to provide mutual support while maintaining access to both the front and back exits of his store. Stan Sacred spoke without moving her eyes from McKinnon's face. "We conduct honorable business with honorable merchants. Our presence here threatens no one except those who profit from dishonesty or exploitation." McKinnon's laugh held no humor, just the cold amusement of someone who enjoyed intimidating others. "See, that's where you're wrong, squaw. Everything about your presence here threatens the natural order of things. We've worked hard to establish proper relationships in this territory, and we don't appreciate outsiders disrupting arrangements that serve everyone's best interests." Samuel felt anger building in his chest as he recognized the implications of McKinnon's words. The rancher wasn't just expressing personal prejudice, he was claiming territorial authority over commercial relationships and threatening anyone who challenged the existing power structure. The same structure that had kept Samuel trapped in a cycle of humiliation and limited opportunities. Kills many horses, stepped forward with the fluid grace of someone trained in combat, her hand resting casually near the knife at her belt. Your natural order appears to include treating honest merchants with disrespect based on physical appearance. Such behavior reveals more about your character than theirs. The tension in the store escalated dramatically as McKinnon's men spread out to flanking positions, their intentions clearly moving beyond verbal intimidation toward physical confrontation. Samuel realized that his store was about to become a battleground, where the outcome would determine not just his immediate safety, but the entire future of cross-cultural commerce in Cedar Falls. Dr. Foster appeared in the doorway behind McKinnon's group, apparently having fetched what he considered appropriate authority to handle the situation. But instead of bringing law enforcement or civil officials, he'd brought more ranch hands and cattle workers, whose loyalty belonged to the economic interests that dominated the territory's power structure. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Foster said with his characteristic professional tone, "I think it would be wise for you to conclude whatever business you're conducting with these visitors and return to serving the community that has supported your establishment for so many years." The phrase "supported your establishment" struck Samuel as particularly galling, given that the same community had subjected him to daily mockery while grudgingly purchasing his goods because no alternatives existed. Their support had consisted of taking his services for granted, while ensuring he never forgot his place in their social hierarchy. Running Wolf woman addressed Samuel directly, ignoring the increasingly hostile white men surrounding them. "Now you see the risks of maintaining your current situation. These people will never allow you to grow beyond the limitations they've imposed. They need you dependent and diminished to maintain their own sense of superiority." McKinnon's face darkened with rage at being ignored, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. "Nobody asked for your opinion, squaw. This is white man's business in a white man's town. You and your friends need to collect your things and ride out before things get unpleasant." The moment stretched with deadly potential as both sides recognized that violence was becoming increasingly likely. Samuel found himself facing the choice that would define not just his commercial future, but his fundamental identity. He could capitulate to the familiar intimidation, preserve his fragile status quo, and continue accepting the limitations that had defined his existence for 3 years. Or he could stand with people who'd shown him respect and dignity, knowing that such a decision would make him a permanent enemy of the power structure that controlled Cedar Falls. Samuel Morrison stepped down from his platform and walked around, his counter to stand beside the 4 Lakota women, his action serving as an unmistakable declaration of allegiance. Despite the physical danger he was courting, he felt more authentic and powerful than he had since his father's death. "These women are my invited guests and valued business partners," Samuel said, his voice carrying more authority than he'd ever managed to project. "Any threats directed toward them are threats directed toward Morrison's general store and will be treated accordingly." The silence that followed his statement felt electric with possibility and danger. McKinnon stared at Samuel with undisguised amazement, apparently unable to process the reality of open defiance from someone he'd always considered completely powerless. "You're making a serious mistake, little man," McKinnon said, his voice dropping to the whisper that experienced intimidators used to signal escalating threats. "This territory has room for people who understand their place and no room at all for those who forget it. You might want to reconsider your position before consequences become permanent." Talks to Spirits spoke for the first time since the confrontation began, her words carrying the weight of spiritual authority that transcended cultural boundaries. We see your heart, violent man. We see the fear that drives your cruelty, the emptiness that requires constant dominance over others to feel whole. Such sickness brings only suffering to yourself and those around you." Her assessment seemed to penetrate McKinnon's aggressive facade in ways that physical threats couldn't, revealing vulnerabilities that his intimidation tactics were designed to conceal. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features before being replaced by renewed fury. "We'll see how wise your spiritual insights prove to be," McKinnon snarled, gesturing for his men to withdraw. "This conversation isn't finished." "Not by a long shot." As the group of hostile white men filed out of the store, their departure felt less like retreat than tactical withdrawal designed to facilitate regrouping for a more serious assault. Samuel understood that he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, committing himself to a course of action that would bring both unprecedented opportunities and equally unprecedented dangers. "Running Wolf." Woman placed her hand briefly on Samuel's shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement that carried the weight of formal alliance. "You have chosen courage over comfort, growth over stagnation. Such decisions require strength that few people possess. We are honored to call you partner and friend." The transformation was complete. Samuel Morrison was no longer the mockery target of Cedar Falls, but the proprietor of a store that served customers who valued integrity over conformity, courage over convenience. The battle for his future had begun, and he was finally fighting alongside allies who understood that respect was earned through character rather than inherited through circumstance. But as he looked out his front window at the gathering storm, clouds that matched the political tensions now swirling around his store, Samuel knew that the real tests of his decision were yet to come. The remainder of that November afternoon transformed Morrison's General Store into something unprecedented in Cedar Falls history, a genuine center of cross-cultural commerce and planning. Word of the confrontation with McKinnon's men had spread through the town's informal communication network with the speed that only shocking news could achieve, creating ripple effects that reached far beyond Samuel's immediate circumstances. Running Wolf woman had dispatched Kill's many horses to retrieve additional materials from their horses, including detailed ledgers that documented the Confederation's trading history with other frontier merchants. These records revealed a sophisticated understanding of regional commerce that impressed Samuel with both its scope and its precision. The Lakota communities maintained detailed accounts of seasonal price fluctuations, supplier reliability, quality, variations among different manufacturers, and even predictions of market trends based on factors that white merchants rarely considered. "We track buffalo migration patterns, weather cycles, military movements, and railroad construction schedules," Running Wolf woman explained as she opened one of several leather-bound record books. "All of these factors affect supply and demand in ways that can be anticipated and planned for. Most traders react to changes after they occur. We prefer to position ourselves advantageously before changes become obvious to everyone else." Samuel studied pages filled with notations in both English and Lakota pictographs, recognizing a record-keeping system that rivaled anything he'd learned in formal business education. The Confederation tracked not just their own needs and resources, but also the commercial patterns of white settlements, mining operations, military installations, and railroad crews across hundreds of miles of territory. Stands Sacred spread out additional maps that showed seasonal movement patterns for various tribal bands, marking locations where temporary trading posts could be established during specific times of the year. "We don't simply wait for merchants to come to us," she explained. "We create opportunities for commerce at locations and times that benefit both parties. Mobile trading requires different strategies than fixed location business, but it can be much more profitable for everyone involved." The complexity of what they were proposing began to reveal itself as Samuel studied their materials. This wasn't just about supplying goods to a single community. but about becoming part of a mobile commerce network that could access markets and opportunities throughout the Wyoming Territory and beyond. His store would serve as the Confederation's primary supply depot, but the partnership would also involve establishing temporary trading operations at seasonal gatherings, hunt locations, and treaty conferences. Talks to Spirits contributed her own perspective on the commercial opportunities. Healing knowledge represents a particularly valuable trade commodity. Your access to manufactured medicines combined with our expertise in natural remedies could create products that neither culture could develop alone. Such innovations often command premium prices from customers who've experienced their effectiveness. Samuel found himself sketching preliminary plans for expanding his store's medicinal section, incorporating both traditional pharmaceutical supplies and carefully prepared herbal remedies that could serve customers from both communities. The potential for developing unique products that drew on both cultures' knowledge was exciting from both commercial and intellectual perspectives, but their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of unexpected visitors, who would test Samuel's new alliance sooner than anyone had anticipated. 3 women from Cedar Falls entered the store with the determined bearing of people who'd come to deliver important information rather than conduct routine business. Sarah Chun, the Chinese seamstress who'd faced her own share of discrimination in the predominantly white town. Rosa Martinez, whose Mexican heritage had made her family frequent targets of suspicion and prejudice. And surprisingly, Ellen Patterson, Jake's wife, whose presence suggested that not all white residents supported the aggressive stance her husband had taken earlier. Sarah Chen spoke first, her English carefully measured but emotionally urgent. "Mr. Morrison, we bring warning. McKinnon's men gather at saloon, speaking of ways to persuade you that partnership with Indian peoples is dangerous for business. They plan action tonight after most honest folk go to sleep." Rosa Martinez nodded confirmation, her own experiences with ethnic tensions making her particularly sensitive to brewing conflicts. "My husband overhears conversation at blacksmith shop. They speak of burning, of teaching lessons about proper associations. They believe intimidation will force you to reject alliance and return to previous arrangements." Ellen Patterson's presence was the most surprising element of their warning delegation. As the wife of one of Samuel's most consistent tormentors, her decision to provide intelligence about planned violence represented a significant personal risk and an unexpected source of potential support. "I cannot stand silent while men plan violence against honest business," Ellen said, her voice carrying the quiet determination of someone who'd made a difficult moral choice. "My husband's behavior toward you has shamed our family for years, but I never found courage to speak against it. Tonight's plans cross lines that no decent person should accept." Running Wolf woman listened to these warnings with the focused attention of someone accustomed to evaluating threats and developing countermeasures. The fact that McKinnon's group was planning immediate action suggested that they viewed Samuel's alliance with the Confederation as a serious threat to their control over regional commerce and social hierarchy. Violence against trading partners violates both white law and tribal custom, Stan Sacred observed grimly. Such actions create obligations for response that extend far beyond the immediate participants. McKinnon may believe he's solving a local problem, but he's actually creating regional complications that could affect everyone in this territory. Samuel realized that his decision to ally with the Lakota women had consequences that extended far beyond his personal circumstances. If McKinnon's group succeeded in using violence to prevent cross-cultural commerce, they would establish a precedent that could affect trading relationships throughout the Wyoming Territory. Conversely, if the alliance survived this initial challenge, it could open doors for other merchants and communities to develop similar partnerships. Talks to Spirits studied the 3 warning women with evident interest, recognizing kindred spirits who'd also faced discrimination and marginalization within Cedar Falls' social structure. "You risk much by bringing this information," Such courage deserves recognition and protection. Are you prepared to face consequences for choosing justice over safety? The question highlighted a crucial aspect of the developing situation. By warning Samuel about planned violence, these women had effectively declared themselves allies of the cross-cultural partnership, making them potential targets for the same intimidation and retaliation that threatened him. Sarah Chun's response was immediate and firm. Chinese people understand persecution, understand silence of good people when bad people act with violence, cannot build good community by staying silent when neighbors threatened. Rosa Martinez nodded agreement. Mexican. Families know what happens when some people decide that others don't deserve respect or protection. If we don't stand together against such thinking, eventually no one remains safe. Ellen Patterson's answer came more slowly, as if she were processing the full implications of her choice. I've watched my husband and his friends turn this town into a place where might makes right, where different means wrong, where fear drives out decency. My children are growing up thinking such behavior is normal. I cannot allow that to continue. Samuel felt overwhelmed by the realization that his decision to partner with the Lakota women had somehow catalyzed a broader movement of resistance against the intimidation and prejudice that had dominated Cedar Falls for years. People who'd remained silent during his years of daily humiliation were now finding courage to speak out against planned violence. Running Wolf, woman began sketching defensive preparations with the efficiency of someone who'd faced similar threats before. Immediate safety requires coordination between all potential targets. If they plan to attack this store, they may also target the homes and businesses of anyone who's shown support for cross-cultural alliance. The next several hours transformed into an intensive planning session that brought together people who'd never previously collaborated on anything. Samuel found himself at the center of a diverse coalition that included Native American strategists, immigrant families who understood persecution, and even white residents who'd grown disgusted with the culture of intimidation that had made Cedar Falls a place where respect was determined by fear rather than character. As evening approached and the threat of violence became more immediate, Samuel realized that his quiet store had become the headquarters for a movement that would either establish new standards of community cooperation or face destruction by those who profited from maintaining the old patterns of dominance and exclusion. Battle for the future of Cedar Falls was about to begin, and Samuel Morrison had somehow become its unlikely leader. As darkness settled over Cedar Falls, Morrison's general store became a fortress of determination defended by the most unlikely alliance in Wyoming Territory history. Samuel had never imagined that his small building could accommodate so many people working toward a common goal. Yet somehow the space expanded to hold not just the 4 Lakota women, but also the warning delegation of Sarah Chen, Rosa Martinez, and Ellen Patterson, plus several other residents who'd quietly arrived as word spread about the planned attack. Thomas Chun, Sarah's husband who worked as a carpenter and understood structural vulnerabilities, had spent the afternoon reinforcing the store's doors and windows with wooden barriers that could withstand significant force. His craftsmanship revealed skills that the white community had consistently undervalued, creating defensive preparations that impressed even Stan Sacred with their tactical effectiveness. Miguel Martinez had brought his blacksmithing tools and was fashioning metal reinforcements for critical access points, his expertise in metalwork proving invaluable for creating obstacles that would channel any attackers into predictable approaches. The irony wasn't lost on Samuel that men whose skills had been dismissed by the town's power structure were now providing the technical expertise necessary to defend against that same structure's violence. Running Wolf woman had established a Savist communication network that utilized whistle signals and mirror flashes to coordinate with Lakota scouts positioned throughout the town. These observers could monitor McKinnon's activities while providing early warning of any movement toward the store. Samuel realized he was witnessing military-level, strategic planning that revealed capabilities the white community had never suspected existed among their Native American neighbors. Preparation wins battles before fighting begins, kills many. Horses explained as she organized weapons and ammunition with professional efficiency. Violence succeeds only when it catches victims unprepared and isolated. Tonight, we are neither unprepared nor isolated. The defensive preparations were interrupted by the arrival of Federal Marshal William Thompson, whose presence immediately altered the evening's dynamics in ways no one had anticipated. Thompson was a career law enforcement officer with extensive experience in frontier conflicts, and his jurisdiction superseded local authority in matters involving interstate commerce and federal treaty obligations. "I've received reports about planned violence against a legitimate trading operation," Marshal Thompson announced as he surveyed the defensive preparations inside Samuel's store. Such actions would violate both territorial law and federal regulations governing commerce with tribal communities. "I'm here to ensure that legal commercial activities proceed without illegal interference." Samuel felt relief flooding through him as he realized that their situation had attracted official attention from authorities who possessed both the legal standing and practical power to intervene effectively. But running Wolf Woman's expression suggested that federal involvement introduced complications as well as protection. "Marshal Thompson," she said with respectful caution, "we appreciate official recognition of our rights to conduct legal commerce. However, we also understand that federal protection sometimes comes with expectations and obligations that may limit our future freedom of action." The marshal nodded with the understanding of someone who'd navigated similar situations before. "Fair point. My presence here tonight is specifically to prevent violence and protect legal activities. I have no authority or intention to regulate the commercial relationships you develop, only to ensure they're not disrupted by criminal behavior." Ellen Patterson stepped forward with information that proved crucial to understanding the evening's likely developments. "Marshal, my husband and his associates believe they're acting to protect community interests rather than violating law. They've convinced themselves that preventing inappropriate commercial relationships serves legitimate social purposes. They may not back down simply because federal authority is present." Her observation highlighted a critical aspect of the confrontation that was about to unfold. McKinnon's group wasn't just pursuing criminal objectives. They were operating under ideological justifications that made them potentially more dangerous than simple criminals seeking personal gain. Men who believed they were defending their community against cultural contamination might be willing to escalate violence even when faced with superior legal authority. Talks to Spirits had been quietly observing the marshal since his arrival, and her assessment carried the weight of spiritual insight that often proved more accurate than purely tactical analysis. This lawman carries both strength and doubt. He has seen violence accomplish what law could not prevent, and he fears tonight may test the limits of official authority. His presence helps us, but it does not guarantee safety. As the evening progressed toward the midnight hour when violence typically emerged from saloon planning into street action, the defenders of Morrison's General Store found themselves joined by additional unexpected allies. Dr. Foster appeared at the back door, his medical bag in hand and his expression carrying the shame of someone seeking to make amends for earlier poor judgment. "I cannot support violence against legitimate business activities," Dr. Foster announced as he was admitted through the reinforced entrance. "My medical oath requires me to preserve life and prevent unnecessary harm. If conflict occurs tonight, injured people will need treatment regardless of which side they represent." Samuel recognized the doctor's arrival as significant beyond its immediate practical benefits. Dr. Foster's decision to position himself with the defenders, rather than remaining neutral, represented a crack in the united front that the town's establishment had previously maintained against anyone who challenged their social hierarchy. The atmosphere inside the store grew increasingly tense as midnight approached, and Lakota scouts reported movement from the direction of Murphy's saloon. Torchlight was visible in the distance, accompanied by the sound of multiple horses and the voices of men who'd clearly spent considerable time preparing themselves psychologically for violent action. Marshal Thompson positioned himself where he could be clearly seen from the street, his federal badge and official authority serving as visible deterrents to anyone considering illegal action. But he also checked his weapons with the professional efficiency of someone who understood that legal authority sometimes required physical enforcement to maintain credibility. Running Wolf, woman made final preparations for what appeared to be an inevitable confrontation, distributing instructions to her companions while ensuring that non-combatants were positioned away from potential lines of fire. Her tactical expertise was becoming increasingly apparent as she coordinated defensive arrangements that maximized their advantages while minimizing vulnerabilities. "Remember," she addressed the entire group, "we defend ourselves and our legal rights, but we do not seek to escalate beyond necessity. Violence that goes beyond legitimate defense creates problems that extend far beyond tonight's events." Samuel found himself standing at the center of a conflict that had grown far beyond his personal circumstances to encompass fundamental questions about justice, community values, and the future direction of frontier society. The alliance that had begun with a simple commercial proposal had evolved into a test case for whether diverse communities could coexist and cooperate, or whether fear and prejudice would continue to dominate regional relationships. The sound of approaching horses grew louder as McKinnon's group moved through the town toward Morrison's general store, their torches creating moving shadows that danced across building walls like harbingers of violence. Samuel could hear voices calling out challenges and threats designed to intimidate anyone who might consider supporting the cross-cultural alliance. "Morrison," McKinnon's voice carried clearly through the night air, "you've got one last chance to end this foolishness peacefully. Send your Indian friends away and get back to serving the community that made your business possible. Otherwise, you'll discover what happens to traitors who forget their proper loyalties." Marshal Thompson stepped outside the store, his federal authority clearly visible in the torchlight. "This is Federal Marshal William Thompson. You men are interfering with legal commercial activities protected under territorial and federal law. Disperse immediately or face arrest for conspiracy to commit violence against legitimate business operations." The confrontation had reached its climactic moment, with federal law enforcement authority facing off against local vigilante justice in a conflict that would determine not just Samuel's future, but the entire trajectory of community development. In Cedar Falls and beyond, the next few minutes would reveal whether justice could triumph over intimidation, whether diverse alliances could survive violent opposition, and whether a dwarf shopkeeper's courage to form unlikely friendships could transform an entire town's understanding of human worth and dignity. The standoff in the street outside Morrison's general store stretched for several agonizing minutes as both sides assessed their positions and calculated the costs of escalation. McKinnon's torchlit group numbered at least 15 men, their faces painted with shadows and alcohol-fueled bravado, while Marshal Thompson stood alone in the circle of light created by their flames, his federal authority the only thing preventing immediate violence. Samuel watched from behind the reinforced window, his heart pounding as he realized that his decision to ally with the Lakota women had created a moment of historical significance that would be remembered long after the immediate participants were forgotten. The outcome of this confrontation would establish precedents that affected not just Cedar Falls, but frontier communities throughout the Wyoming Territory and beyond. McKinnon dismounted from his horse with deliberate slowness, his movements designed to project confidence while buying time to assess the unexpected presence of federal law enforcement. Samuel could see the rancher's mind working, calculating whether his group's local support and numerical advantage could overcome the legal and moral authority that Marshal Thompson represented. "Marshal," McKinnon said with forced respect. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about our intentions tonight. We're not here to interfere with legal commerce. We're here to protect our community from relationships that could endanger everyone's safety and prosperity." Marshal Thompson's response carried the weight of federal authority backed by years of frontier law enforcement experience. "Mr. McKinnon, I've reviewed the commercial arrangements being discussed in Mr. Morrison's store. They involve the legal purchase and sale of goods between willing parties, conducted according to territorial regulations and federal treaty obligations. There is no threat to community safety except the one you and your men are creating through threats of violence." The Marshal's words seemed to embolden some of McKinnon's followers while causing others to shift uncomfortably in their saddles. Samuel realized that the group's unity was more fragile than their aggressive approach suggested, with some members apparently having second thoughts about confronting federal authority in pursuit of what was essentially local prejudice. Running. Wolf woman had positioned herself where she could observe the street confrontation, while maintaining readiness to coordinate defensive actions if violence erupted. Her tactical assessment was being communicated through subtle hand signals to her companions, who were prepared to respond with the kind of coordinated precision that could turn a numerical disadvantage into strategic superiority. "The Marshal speaks truth," Running Wolf woman called out, her voice carrying clearly across the tense space between the two groups. "We seek only honest trade with honest merchants. Violence serves no one's interests except those who profit from fear and division." Her words seemed to strike McKinnon with particular force, perhaps because they highlighted the ideological weakness of his position in ways that legal arguments couldn't accomplish. The rancher's face darkened with frustrated rage as he realized that his group's moral authority was being systematically undermined by people he'd expected to intimidate into submission. Dr. Foster emerged from the store's fortified entrance, his medical bag visible in the torchlight as he positioned himself between the two groups. His presence added another layer of complexity to the confrontation, representing professional neutrality and humanitarian concern that transcended the political and economic conflicts driving the violence. "As a medical professional, I've sworn to do no harm," Dr. Foster announced, his voice carrying the authority of education and social standing that even McKinnon's group couldn't easily dismiss. "Violence tonight will create injuries and suffering that serve no legitimate purpose. I urge everyone to step back from actions that will damage this community for years to come." Samuel was amazed to see how the doctor's intervention affected the dynamics of the confrontation. Several of McKinnon's men began looking uncertainly at their leader, apparently questioning whether their cause justified violence against respected community members who were clearly committed to preventing unnecessary harm. But McKinnon himself seemed beyond rational persuasion, his commitment to maintaining the existing social hierarchy apparently strong enough to override concerns about legal consequences or community damage. Samuel realized he was witnessing the last stand of a power structure that had dominated frontier communities through intimidation and exclusion, facing its first serious challenge from forces committed to justice and inclusion. "You people don't understand what you're destroying," McKinnon declared, his voice rising with desperate intensity. "This territory was built by white men who fought and died to create something better than what they left behind. We can't allow that sacrifice to be wasted by letting outsiders change the fundamental character of what we've built." Ellen Patterson stepped forward from the group of defenders, her presence clearly shocking her husband Jake and the other ranch hands, who'd never expected to face opposition from within their own families and social circles. "Trace McKinnon," Ellen said with the quiet authority of someone who'd found her moral courage at exactly the right moment. "My family came to this territory seeking opportunity and freedom from the prejudices that limited our lives back east. We didn't come here to recreate the same narrow thinking that drove us away from supposedly civilized places." Her words seemed to resonate with several townspeople who'd gathered at the edges of the confrontation, drawn by the commotion but uncertain about which side represented their true interests. Samuel could see that the evening's events were creating a community-wide moment of moral reckoning that would force everyone to choose between fear-based exclusion and hope-based inclusion. Jake Patterson dismounted and approached his wife with visible confusion and anger. "Ellen, what are you doing? You're embarrassing our family by taking sides against your own people in favor of strangers who don't share our values or interests." Ellen's response carried the passion of someone who'd been silent too long and was finally speaking her deepest convictions. "Jake, our values should include treating all people with dignity, regardless of their race or physical appearance. If standing up for decency means embarrassing you, then perhaps you should examine why you find basic human respect embarrassing." The marital confrontation seemed to crystallize the broader community conflict in personal terms that everyone present could understand. Samuel realized that his alliance with the Lakota women had somehow become a catalyst for families and neighbors to confront fundamental disagreements about justice, respect, and community values that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Marshall Thompson used the momentary distraction to position himself more strategically, placing federal authority between the potential combatants, while demonstrating his commitment to preventing violence through professional law enforcement rather than simply standing aside and allowing local conflicts to resolve themselves through force. Thomas Chun and Miguel Martinez emerged from the store carrying improvised weapons that demonstrated their commitment to defending the cross-cultural alliance they'd helped create. Their presence added another dimension to the confrontation, showing that the coalition supporting Samuel's partnership extended beyond racial and cultural boundaries to include economic solidarity among working people who'd experienced discrimination. "We stand together," Thomas Chun announced in his careful English, "because justice protects everyone or protects no one. Tonight we decide what kind of community Cedar Falls becomes." Miguel Martinez nodded agreement while maintaining readiness for physical confrontation. "My family knows what happens when good people stay silent while bad people use violence to control others. We will not be silent tonight." The gathering crowd of townspeople was beginning to choose sides in ways that surprised even Samuel with their implications. People he'd never expected to support him were positioning themselves with the defenders, while others he'd hoped might show courage were remaining safely distant from the confrontation. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who ran the boarding house, surprised everyone by walking directly up to McKinnon's group with the fearless authority that sometimes comes with advanced age and extensive life experience. "Trace McKinnon," she said with the voice of someone who'd watched frontier communities rise and fall based on their fundamental character. "I've seen what happens to towns that choose fear over fairness, exclusion over opportunity. They become places that decent people leave and that young people flee the moment they're old enough to escape. Is that the legacy you want for Cedar Falls?" Her challenge seemed to pierce through McKinnon's ideological certainty in ways that legal arguments and moral appeals hadn't managed to accomplish. Samuel could see doubt flickering across the rancher's features as he confronted the possibility that his actions might destroy the community he claimed to be protecting. But even as some of McKinnon's supporters began showing signs of wavering commitment, others seemed to be hardening their resolve for violence, apparently concluding that retreat would represent permanent defeat for the social hierarchy they'd spent years constructing and maintaining. The confrontation was reaching a crucial tipping point, where words would either prevent violence or prove inadequate to overcome the fundamental conflicts that divided Cedar Falls into irreconcilable camps. The tension in the street had reached a suffocating intensity when an unexpected sound shattered the standoff: the rapid approach of multiple riders from the northeast, their horses moving at speeds that suggested urgent purpose rather than casual travel. Both McKinnon's group and the defenders of Morrison's store turned toward the sound, uncertain whether these new arrivals would tip the balance toward violence or resolution. Samuel felt his breath catch as he recognized the lead rider illuminated by the torchlight. Chief Standing Bear of the Oglala Lakota, a man whose reputation for both diplomatic wisdom and military prowess was legendary throughout the Wyoming territory. Behind him rode a delegation of 20 warriors, their presence transforming the evening's confrontation from a local dispute into something with potentially territorial significance. Running Wolf woman stepped forward to greet her. Chief with the respectful protocol that tribal leadership demanded, but her expression carried surprise at his unexpected arrival. Samuel realized that the Confederation's decision to establish trading partnerships had implications that extended far beyond commercial considerations into realms of political strategy and cultural diplomacy that he was only beginning to understand. Chief Standing Bear dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback, his bearing radiating the kind of authority that came from leading people through both prosperity and crisis. His regalia was formal enough to indicate that this visit had ceremonial as well as practical significance, suggesting that Samuel's alliance with the Lakota women had attracted attention at the highest levels of tribal leadership. "I have come to witness the character of the man who offers friendship to my daughters," Chief Standing Bear announced in English that was both precise and powerfully delivered. His words carried across the tense space between the two groups, commanding attention from everyone present, regardless of their position in the conflict. McKinnon's face had gone pale as he realized that his planned intimidation of a local shopkeeper had somehow escalated into a confrontation with one of the most respected and feared leaders in the entire region. The rancher's numerical advantage had evaporated in the face of genuine military force led by someone with both the authority and ability to respond to violence with overwhelming retaliation. Marshal Thompson stepped forward to address the chief. With the professional courtesy that federal law enforcement typically showed to legitimate tribal leadership, "Chief Standing Bear, I'm Federal Marshal William Thompson. I'm here to ensure that legal commercial activities proceed without illegal interference. Your presence is welcome if it serves to prevent violence and protect legitimate rights." The chief's response revealed diplomatic sophistication that impressed Samuel with its careful balance of respect for federal authority and assertion of tribal sovereignty. "Marshal Thompson, we seek only to protect our people's right to trade freely with honorable merchants. Violence against such relationships would violate both white law and tribal custom, creating obligations for response that extend far beyond tonight's events." Samuel understood that he was witnessing a masterful display of psychological warfare, as Chief Standing Bear's carefully chosen words reminded everyone present that attacks on Lakota traders would be viewed as acts of war requiring proportional response. The stakes of the confrontation had suddenly escalated beyond local community conflicts into realms of territorial security and federal treaty obligations. Dr. Foster, apparently recognizing an opportunity to serve as cultural translator, approached the chief with his medical bag, visible as a symbol of humanitarian neutrality. "Chief Standing Bear, as the town's physician, I can attest that Mr. Morrison has always conducted business with integrity and fairness. The trading relationship your people are developing serves the interests of both communities." The doctor's endorsement seemed to carry significant weight with both sides, representing educated professional opinion that transcended the emotional and ideological arguments that had been driving the conflict. Samuel realized that Dr. Foster's earlier support for McKinnon's intimidation tactics had been replaced by genuine recognition of the alliance's legitimacy and value, but McKinnon himself remained defiant, apparently concluding that retreat at this point would represent permanent defeat for the social hierarchy he'd spent years constructing and defending. "Chief, with all due respect, this isn't about trade. It's about maintaining proper relationships that serve everyone's long-term interests. Some partnerships create more problems than they solve." Chief Standing Bear's response carried the weight of historical experience and cultural wisdom that exposed the bankruptcy of McKinnon's position. Young rancher, we have observed your community's treatment of this merchant for many seasons. You speak of proper relationships while denying respect to one who has earned it through honorable conduct. Such contradiction reveals more about your character than his. The chief's words seemed to resonate powerfully with the growing crowd of townspeople who'd gathered to witness the confrontation. Samuel could see that many residents were hearing their community's behavior evaluated by an outside perspective that highlighted contradictions and injustices they'd grown accustomed to accepting without question. Ellen Patterson found her voice again, emboldened by the presence of legitimate authority that supported her moral position. Chief Standing Bear speaks truth that we've been afraid to acknowledge. This town has allowed fear and prejudice to corrupt our sense of justice and community. Tonight represents our chance to choose a better path. Her words seemed to trigger a cascade of responses from other townspeople who'd remained silent during years of discrimination and intimidation. Samuel watched with amazement as people he'd never expected to support him began speaking out about their own experiences with the town's culture of exclusion and bullying. Sarah Chen stepped forward with the quiet dignity that marked her approach to all social interactions. Chinese people understand what happens when communities choose fear over fairness. We have watched Mr. Morrison face daily cruelty with patience and grace that shamas those who should know better. Miguel Martinez nodded agreement while addressing the crowd directly. My family came to this territory seeking opportunity and respect that old places could not provide. We found instead the same narrow thinking that drives good people away and leaves only those who profit from fear and division. Thomas Chen added his own perspective as someone who'd observed Cedar Falls' social dynamics from the position of an ethnic outsider. Tonight we decide whether this community grows stronger through inclusion or weaker through the continued exclusion of those who differ from expectations of conformity. The cumulative effect of these testimonies was creating a community-wide moment of moral reckoning that transcended the immediate conflict over Samuel's trading partnership. Samuel realized that his alliance with the Lakota women had somehow become a catalyst for confronting broader patterns of discrimination and exclusion that had been poisoning Cedar Falls for years. Chief Standing Bear had been listening to these exchanges with the careful attention of someone evaluating not just individual statements, but the overall character of a community that his people might engage with on a long-term basis. His assessment would influence not just tonight's events, but the entire future of cross-cultural relationships in the region. I see clearly now, the chief announced with formal authority. This merchant has faced adversity with dignity that honors both his character and his father's memory. Those who would deny him respect reveal their own unworthiness for the positions of influence they claim to hold. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house operator whose earlier intervention had surprised everyone, stepped forward to address the chief directly. Chief Standing Bear, many of us have remained silent too long while injustice occurred in our community. We ask for the opportunity to prove that Cedar Falls can become a place worthy of the partnerships you offer. The elderly woman's appeal seemed to touch something in the chief that transcended political calculations and reached into realms of human compassion and community healing. Samuel realized that he was witnessing the beginning of a transformation that extended far beyond commercial relationships into fundamental questions about the kind of society that frontier communities could become. But even as support for the alliance grew among previously silent townspeople, Samuel could see that McKinnon and his core supporters remained committed to violent opposition, apparently concluding that compromise would represent total defeat for everything they'd fought to establish and maintain. The confrontation was approaching its ultimate crisis point, where words would either prevent violence or prove inadequate to overcome the fundamental conflicts that had brought Cedar Falls to this moment of historical reckoning. The standoff had reached its breaking point when McKinnon made a decision that would be remembered as the moment Cedar Falls either evolved into something better or descended into violence that would scar the community for generations. Rather than backing down in the face of overwhelming opposition, the rancher drew his pistol with the desperate fury of someone who saw his entire worldview crumbling around him. "This ends now," McKinnon shouted, his weapon trained not on Chief Standing Bear or Marshal Thompson, but directly at Samuel Morrison. "You want to see what happens to traitors who forget their place? Watch closely." The crack of gunfire split the night air, but the bullet never reached its intended target. Stan Sacred had moved with the lightning reflexes of a trained warrior, her own weapon speaking before McKinnon could complete his violent intention. The rancher's pistol flew from his hand as her shot shattered his wrist, sending him screaming to the ground while his followers stared in shock at the sudden reversal of their leader's fortunes. Marshal Thompson was moving before McKinnon hit, the ground federal authority asserting itself with professional efficiency as he placed the wounded rancher under arrest for attempted murder. "Trace McKinnon, you're under federal custody for assault with intent to kill, conspiracy to commit violence against legal commercial activities, and threatening federal officers in the performance of their duties." The marshal's actions seemed to break whatever spell had held McKinnon's followers in thrall to his leadership. One by one, the ranch hands began dismounting and stepping away from their weapons, apparently recognizing that their cause had crossed lines that even their loyalty couldn't justify following across. Foster immediately moved to treat McKinnon's wounded hand, his medical oath requiring him to provide care regardless of his personal feelings about the man's actions. But as he worked to stop the bleeding, his words carried the weight of moral judgment that was perhaps more damaging than the physical injury. "Trace, you've destroyed everything you claim to be protecting. Violence against innocent people serves no legitimate purpose and helps no one's cause." Samuel found himself shaking with delayed shock as he realized how close he'd come to death, saved only by the quick thinking and warrior skills of a woman who'd been willing to risk her own life to protect his. The magnitude of what Stan Sacred had done for him was almost overwhelming to contemplate. She'd committed herself to his defense with actions that could have triggered a larger conflict if circumstances had been different. Chief Standing Bear surveyed the scene with the measured assessment of someone who'd witnessed many such moments of crisis and transformation. His words, when they came, carried the authority of wisdom earned through decades of leadership during one of the most challenging periods in his people's history. "Tonight, we have seen both the worst and best of human nature. Violence born of fear and ignorance, but also courage born of justice and compassion." Running Wolf woman approached Samuel with an expression that mixed relief at his survival with admiration for the courage he'd shown throughout the confrontation. "Samuel Morrison, you have proven yourself worthy of the friendship and alliance we offer. Tonight you stood with us when it would have been easier and safer to stand aside. Such loyalty creates bonds that transcend commercial relationships." The words carried implications that Samuel was only beginning to understand. His alliance with the Lakota Confederation had evolved far beyond a trading partnership into something approaching adoption, into an extended family structure that would provide protection, support, and opportunity for years to come. Ellen Patterson was kneeling beside her wounded husband Jake, who'd been caught in the crossfire of conflicting loyalties and was struggling to understand how his world had changed so dramatically in a single evening. Her words to him carried both compassion and firm resolve. "Jake, this is your chance to choose the man you want to be rather than the man you've been. Our children are watching, and they'll remember what their father did when his community faced its moment of moral reckoning." Jake Patterson's response surprised everyone present, including his wife. "Ellen's right. I've been a fool, following Trace's lead because it was easier than thinking for myself about what's right and wrong. Sam Morrison never deserved the treatment we gave him, and I'm ashamed of my part in it." His public acknowledgement of wrongdoing seemed to trigger similar admissions from other townspeople. who'd participated in or tolerated years of discrimination and mockery. Samuel watched with amazement as people stepped forward to apologize for behavior they'd previously justified or ignored, creating a community-wide moment of confession and potential redemption. Sarah Chun found her voice to address the gathering. "Crowd, tonight we have seen that courage is contagious. When one person stands for justice, others find strength to join them. This is how communities heal and grow stronger." Thomas Chun nodded agreement while helping to secure McKinnon's abandoned weapons. "Fear divides people, but justice unites them. Mr. Morrison's courage tonight has given all of us permission to be better than we were yesterday." Miguel Martinez added his own perspective as someone who'd faced discrimination in multiple communities. "Tonight, Cedar Falls chose to become the kind of place that people want to move to rather than the kind they want to escape from. This choice will affect everyone's future for years to come." Chief Standing Bear had been observing these exchanges with growing approval, apparently recognizing signs of genuine community transformation rather than mere temporary emotional responses to dramatic events. His assessment would determine not just the Confederation's relationship with Samuel's store, but their broader engagement with Cedar Falls as a whole. "I see hearts changing, minds opening, community healing," the chief announced with formal authority. "This gives hope that our peoples can build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear and misunderstanding. Such relationships benefit everyone involved." Marshal Thompson completed his arrest procedures with McKinnon while addressing the broader crowd. "Tonight's events demonstrate that federal law protects all legal commercial activities, regardless of the race, religion, or physical characteristics of the participants. Violence against such activities will always be met with the full force of federal authority." The marshal's statement carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate situation, establishing precedents that would affect how similar conflicts were resolved throughout the Wyoming Territory and beyond. Samuel realized that his small store had somehow become the site of a landmark moment in frontier law enforcement and civil rights protection. Talks to Spirits approached Samuel with the dignity of someone conferring a great honor. "Young merchant, you have shown that true strength comes not from the size of one's body, but from the courage of one's heart. Our people will remember your example and teach it to children not yet born." Her words carried the weight of cultural tradition that transformed Samuel's personal struggle into something approaching legend within Lakota oral history. The dwarf shopkeeper who stood against injustice would become a story told around campfires for generations, inspiring others to find courage in their own moments of testing. As the immediate crisis passed, and the various groups began organizing for departure, Samuel found himself surrounded by people offering assistance, partnership, and friendship in ways he'd never experienced. During his years in Cedar Falls, the transformation was so complete and dramatic that he struggled to process its full implications. Running Wolf Woman began making arrangements for the Confederation's first major trading expedition to Morrison's General Store, scheduled for the following week when they would bring wagons full of goods for exchange and begin implementing the commercial partnership they'd outlined. The scale of the operation she described would establish Samuel as one of the most successful merchants in the entire territory. But beyond the commercial benefits, Samuel realized that he'd gained something far more valuable, a community that valued his contributions, respected his dignity, and appreciated his character. The lonely isolation that had defined his existence for 3 years had been replaced by connections that would sustain and enrich his life in ways he was only beginning to imagine. The night that had begun with threats of violence was ending with promises of cooperation, growth, and mutual prosperity that would transform not just Samuel's personal circumstances, but the entire character of Cedar Falls as a frontier community. 3 months after the night that changed everything, Morrison's General Store had become the beating heart of a transformed Cedar Falls. Samuel stood behind his custom-built platform, no longer as a man seeking dignity, but as someone who commanded respect through proven character and business excellence. The morning sun streamed through windows that had been enlarged to accommodate the increased traffic, illuminating displays that showcased goods from cultures and communities across the Wyoming territory. The transformation was visible in every aspect of the store's operation. Lakota beadwork hung alongside traditional frontier supplies. Chinese herbal remedies shared shelf space with manufactured medicines, and Mexican crafts complemented standard household goods. Samuel had become more than a merchant. He was now a cultural bridge connecting communities that had previously viewed each other with suspicion and fear. Running, Wolf woman entered through the front door with the easy familiarity of someone who'd become both business partner and close friend. Their trading relationship had exceeded every optimistic projection, generating profits that allowed Samuel to expand his inventory, hire additional staff, and establish Morrison's as the premier commercial destination for hundreds of miles in any direction. The Winter Trading Council has approved our proposal for the Mobile Commerce Network, she announced with evident satisfaction. By spring, we'll have established trading routes that connect 12 tribal communities with 6 frontier towns, all coordinated through your store as the central distribution point. Samuel felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with financial success and everything to do with meaningful accomplishment. The network they were creating would provide economic opportunities for communities that had previously been isolated from regional commerce, while breaking down cultural barriers that had fostered misunderstanding and conflict. Chief Standing Bear had become a regular visitor to Cedar Falls, his presence serving as both diplomatic bridge building and practical oversight of the expanding commercial relationships. The federal government had taken notice of their success, sending territorial officials to study their methods as a potential model for cross-cultural commerce. Throughout the American West, the personal relationships that had grown from their initial alliance continued to deepen in ways that enriched Samuel's life beyond anything he'd imagined possible. Stan Sacred had become his closest friend and trusted advisor, her warrior skills now employed as head of security for the increasingly valuable merchandise that moved through his store. Her protection had proven necessary on several occasions, when competitors from other towns had attempted to disrupt their operations through intimidation or sabotage. Thomas and Sarah Chen had opened a restaurant adjacent to the store, serving fusion cuisine that combined Chinese techniques with local ingredients to create dishes that appealed to customers from all cultural backgrounds. Their success had encouraged other immigrant families to establish businesses in Cedar Falls, transforming the town from a monocultural cattle community into a diverse commercial hub. Miguel and Rosa Martinez had expanded their blacksmithing operation to include specialized metalwork that incorporated both Mexican artistic traditions and practical frontier requirements. Their innovations had attracted attention from as far away as Denver and Cheyenne, establishing Cedar Falls as a center for custom craftsmanship that served markets throughout the region. Dr. Foster had undergone perhaps the most dramatic personal transformation of anyone in the community. His medical practice now incorporated traditional healing knowledge from multiple cultures, creating treatment options that proved more effective than purely Western approaches to frontier medicine. His public acknowledgement of past prejudices and commitment to inclusive healing had earned him respect that transcended his earlier social standing. Ellen Patterson had emerged as an unexpected leader in the community's social transformation, organizing events that brought together families from different cultural backgrounds, while advocating for educational opportunities that would prepare local children for life in an increasingly diverse region. Her marriage to Jake had survived his moment of moral reckoning, strengthened by his genuine commitment to becoming a better man and father. Jake himself had become one of Samuel's most loyal customers and surprising defenders. His public transformation from tormentor to ally, serving as powerful evidence that people could change when confronted with clear moral choices. His ranch now employed workers from multiple ethnic backgrounds, paid fair wages, and maintained standards of treatment that had attracted the best workers in the territory. The fate of Trace McKinnon served as a sobering reminder of the consequences of choosing hatred over humanity. His trial had resulted in a federal conviction for attempted murder and conspiracy charges that would keep him in territorial prison for 20 years. His ranch had been sold to pay legal fees and victim compensation, its lands purchased by a consortium that included several tribal communities and immigrant families seeking agricultural opportunities. Marshall Thompson had been promoted to territorial supervisor based partly on his handling of the Cedar Falls situation, which had become a case study in federal law enforcement approaches to civil rights protection and cross-cultural conflict resolution. His continued presence in the region provided ongoing assurance that legal protections for minority rights would be vigorously enforced. The economic impact of Samuel's alliance with the Lakota Confederation had exceeded everyone's most optimistic projections. Morrison's General Store now employed 12 people from 6 different cultural backgrounds, paid wages that were 30% above territorial averages, and generated tax revenue that had funded improvements to Cedar Falls' infrastructure, schools, and public services. But the personal transformation remained the most meaningful aspect of Samuel's new life. He woke each morning, eager to face challenges that utilized his abilities rather than highlighting his limitations. The platform behind his counter no longer represented compensation for physical differences, but elevation that reflected his community standing and business success. The children of Cedar Falls had become perhaps the most visible symbols of the town's transformation. Instead of learning prejudice and exclusion, they were growing up in an environment that celebrated diversity and taught respect for different approaches to life and work. Samuel had become a favored figure among local youth, his store serving as an informal classroom where children learned about commerce, culture, and character. Young Tommy Patterson, whose father Jake had once led efforts to mock Samuel, now spent his afternoons helping in the store and learning basic business principles that would serve him throughout his life. The boy's natural curiosity and enthusiasm reminded Samuel daily of how much positive change was possible when communities chose growth over stagnation. The success of their model had attracted attention from territorial officials, federal representatives, and even journalists from Eastern newspapers who recognized the historical significance of what was happening in Cedar Falls. Samuel had been invited to testify before territorial committees studying policies for managing cultural diversity in frontier communities, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. A delegation of Chinese merchants from California had traveled to Cedar Falls specifically to study their integration methods. Mexican ranchers from Texas had sent representatives to explore similar alliances. Even European immigrant communities from the Dakotas had inquired about replicating their approach to cross-cultural commerce. Samuel's personal life had blossomed in ways that reflected his professional success. His friendship with the 4 Lakota women had deepened into bonds that felt more like family relationships than business partnerships. He'd been formally adopted into their tribal structure through ceremonies that granted him status and protection that extended far beyond commercial considerations. Running Wolf woman had become his closest confidant and advisor, their relationship transcending cultural boundaries to create understanding that required no translation. Stan Sacred continued serving as his protector and friend, her warrior skills ensuring that no one would ever again threaten him with impunity. Kill's many horses had become his hunting partner and outdoor guide, teaching him wilderness skills that connected him to the natural world in ways his sheltered upbringing had never provided. Talks to Spirits served as his cultural mentor and spiritual advisor, helping him understand how commercial success could serve broader purposes of community, healing, and social justice. The store itself had evolved into something unprecedented in frontier commerce, a cultural center that hosted educational events, diplomatic meetings, artistic exhibitions, and community celebrations that brought together people who had previously lived in isolation from each other. Samuel's vision of creating a business that served everyone had become reality that exceeded his most ambitious dreams. As the sun set over Cedar Falls on this particular evening, painting the sky in colors that matched the cultural richness of the community below, Samuel Morrison reflected on the journey that had brought him from daily humiliation to respected leadership. The laughter that had once tormented him had been replaced by conversations that enriched his understanding of the world and his place within it. The 4 Lakota women who had entered his store 9 months earlier had indeed changed everything, but not in ways anyone could have predicted. They had offered him alliance, friendship, and opportunity, but more importantly, they had shown him that respect was something he deserved rather than something he needed to earn through suffering and submission. Cedar Falls had become proof that frontier communities could choose evolution over stagnation, inclusion over exclusion, cooperation over conflict. The transformation hadn't been easy or automatic, but it had been possible because enough people found the courage to stand for justice when the moment of choice arrived. Samuel Morrison, the dwarf shopkeeper who had once been mocked daily, had become the catalyst for changes that would influence frontier development for generations to come. His store stood as a testament to the truth that dignity belongs to everyone, that strength comes in many forms, and that the most powerful alliances are often forged between those whom society has taught to see as different. The night that had begun with threats of violence had evolved into years of prosperity, friendship, and hope. And every morning when Samuel opened Morrison's general store, he was reminded that the best stories are those where everyone finds their voice, everyone discovers their worth, and everyone learns that love, whether commercial, cultural, or personal, truly needs no words at all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.